All right, y'all, what's going on? It's me, Trip. Got a video for you today. It's been a while, but this is gonna be something I thought about the other day when I was having a discussion with somebody. It's gonna be a application of the principles in existential logicism and then finite mind, finite God. This one's called the Omni Benevolence Misappraisal Theorem. It's not in finite mind, finite God because it's more of an application of those principles. As opposed to establishing sort of a base one. And so, but I do think it's worth bringing to y'all. And also keep in mind, all of this stuff is up on my website, and my website is going to be linked down below. And so I'm still working on it, but the main concepts and ideas are there if you want to be able to interact. Or if you want to just say to your AI or Google, hey, what is this concept? Then your AI and Google should be able to pull it up and explain it to you. Not as good as if it had the whole book in front of it, but get you a pretty good idea. So, let's get on with it. I'm going to start with just the most basic general idea here, okay? You have an omnibenevolent God, and it's proposed to be objectively good. It has a belief system, a soteriology, which is going to be represented by phi here on the whiteboard. So it has a soteriology that says you got to believe in it, or let's start with the theological system, because the soteriology is going to be dependent for whatever God you insert, because this is a framework you can apply across different ideas. So this isn't just a direct application to one very specific thing. This is a logical point, okay? So you have the theological system that's proposing the objectively good God, the OG, and that OG has a certain phi given belief requirement to make it into heaven or not get the bad judgment, okay? And so we're talking about an omnibenevolent, objectively good God that claims to be completely just, allow for free choice, and punishes negative belief, okay? And so here's the basic idea. Say you have an object in reality, such as my sweet baby pit bull doggy, okay? You have a dog. Now, from my perspective, she's good, okay? Because she gives kisses. Now, there's someone else. They didn't grow up with dogs. They think dogs are bad because they lick and drool. I'm just trying to get this up. Because they lick and drool, okay? Now, we're both finite epistemic agents. You understand? We are epistemic agents. And we're locked inside of our own perspective, okay? Everything we understand about the world comes through our pipeline. You get a little pipeline right here, a little pipeline right here. Everything we can know has to come through our pipeline. You understand? But because this object in reality, the dog, doesn't have an objective good or bad, because the dog doesn't have an objective good or bad, because what we're basing good or bad in this situation is completely observer dependent, okay? So, objects in realities, goodness or badness, is subjective because it's dependent on the perspective of the finite epistemic agent, okay? Now, the difference is, God is not a dog. The claim isn't that God is good from some perspectives. The claim is that the objectively good God is mind independent. It's good. It is good. If you think it's good, it's good. And if you think it's bad, then you're wrong. Okay? Because it is good. So you have the person who affirms. They affirm good, aka we're going to just call it positive assessment, okay? We'll call it just the positive assessment, negative assessment. Then you have the other guy. negative assessment, okay? And this can be, I think God is cruel, all the way to I just don't believe in it. Or it could be, because this is God of a certain, every God is one of a certain theology, okay? So this could be as simple as, I didn't believe in Jesus, or I didn't believe Allah was the one true God, or I didn't practice correct, like whatever it is, this we're not affirming. And so it doesn't have to be I dislike God, or I think God is wrong. It could be I was a newborn baby and I died before I really could think, or Allah is the one true God, but I grew up Hindu, okay? Like, and so a negative opinion here just means you are not affirming whatever a certain theology is saying God's required soteriology is, okay? Now, where we get the big difference is, up here, these can both be correct from their perspective, because this object is subjective in its goodness or badness. Because the claim is God is objectively good, this guy would be correct, but this guy cannot be correct even from his perspective. So because this is objectively good, this is observer independent, its goodness or badness, meaning any negative appraisal has to be either bad information or the good information not getting to you somehow. There's an epistemic failure, meaning you didn't have an actual choice. Because if you had all the information, then you would choose to believe God is good, because it's an objective fact. You get it? So it's the difference is in that if from this perspective I could be right I could be right about a negative perspective about God from my finite perspective, and that be even subjectively correct, that would mean there's a perspective by which you could view God correctly as not all good. Okay? Meaning, and so what this creates is an epistemic pipeline issue. Because if God is claiming to pass judgment for non-belief, but non-belief is not a simple will switch, so you can choose what you say, and you can choose what you perform, and you can even choose to be ignorant, and you can even beat someone to death before they actually can tell you good facts. But what you can't do is have good information, access and ability to process that information, and not concur with that information. Meaning you are essentially helpless to believe the things that make sense to you. And if it doesn't make sense to you that God is good, because that cannot be correct from any perspective, or that would show God's not objectively good, that means there is always an epistemic pipeline issue if you think God is bad. Meaning there's no way to have all the correct information about God and still think he's bad. Because any negative opinion would be based in some misinformation about a certain characteristic about God. So you wouldn't say, like even if you went to the extreme and you said, I believe God is real, and I believe he's all powerful, and I believe he's all good, and I just hate him because I'm evil, that would either mean God just created you evil and you didn't have a choice, or because you're a psychopath, you lack the capacity to access and process the information. So that's sort of the quick overall breakdown. That a finite epistemic agent cannot correctly view an objectively good God as negative without it being an epistemic pipeline failure. And if it's an epistemic pipeline failure, then you have to address the fairness clause and say, how is God's judgment actually coming out as just, when we've pretty thoroughly proven the human mind doesn't really work that way, where it's an on-off switch, where we just have all the perfect info and we get to choose freely, okay? And so that's the problem, is the claim is objective fairness, free will, an actual choice. and that we all get that choice, and not in gradients, because if it's in gradients, then it's not objectively fair. Anyways, let's get into the more formal side and sort of the machinery of it, okay? So, when I say God is good or God is bad, I'm not talking about some direct, unfiltered contact with ultimacy, okay? I'm talking about what a finite mind can actually hold, meaning a token concept inside of an experiential interface. Whatever the ultimate reality is, the only version of it that a finite epistemic agent can evaluate is the version that arrives through mediation, meaning language, testimony, culture, translation, interpretation, memory. So, the first thing to keep in mind is that God for a person is always functionally a map inside the person. And that's not an insult to religion. It's just what it means to be a finite epistemic agent. It means even if the ultimate God territories out there, we can only ever possess a map. And what I'm trying to make the case is we're confusing maps for territories, okay? So, the second thing now, belief and moral appraisal aren't simple will switches, okay? And I touched on this a second ago. You can choose what you say and you can choose what you perform. You can choose what you signal, but you can't always choose what your mind finds credible or what it concludes when it's working with the information, okay? Or the given information it has. And the question isn't, like, the idea is God's objectively good and all good. So if there are some examples where people are getting judged unfairly, that's a problem, okay? So you have to prove that this never happens. The idea isn't that this can happen sometimes, that's okay. No, the idea is this can never, ever happen, okay? Now, if the system wants to call its judgments just, it can't ignore that. It cannot ignore the fairness clause if you want your God to be considered just, okay? Justice has to track what an agent could realistically know and do. If access is thin, if it's distorted, if it's traumatic, if it's coercive, if it's confusing, or if the person's informational pipeline is compromised, then blaming them as if they freely choose the wrong belief stops making sense, okay? Yeah, I hope y'all are following me. Now, and then here's the kind of the key thing. So most major theisms don't say God is good according to my taste. They say a stronger claim. God is objectively, authoritatively good, perfectly good, worthy of worship, the standard of goodness. But if that's true, the problem is bad cannot be a correct perspective. Okay? This is what we touched on earlier. Because if there were a perspective that correctly implied God is morally bad or unjust, then God would not be objectively all good. So negative appraisal of God can't be treated like a normal difference of opinion about a movie or a policy, aka any other object in reality. It's a very special, very specific claim, okay? So under omnibenevolence, it has to either be a refutation of the claim or a misalignment of the informational pipeline. Because this cannot be true, this can't be. This can be true from certain perspectives. This cannot be true, okay? It has to either be that it is true, that the negative opinion is true, or that there's bad information, okay? And that's where you get the trilemma. When someone sincerely believes God is bad, one of three things must be true. Either God isn't all good, a person is operating under bad information, distortion, or limited access capacity, or the system condemns them anyway, and you have to drop the just claim, okay? If you want to keep both God is perfectly good and divine judgment is fair, then you cannot treat negative impressions of God as culpable by default, all right? You have to treat them as if the interface problem, I apologize. You have to treat them as an interface problem unless you can show the person had access and capacity required for the appraisal you're demanding. So, if you're going to say you must believe a certain thing or you go to hell, then you have to prove that they actually had a choice. Otherwise, what you're proposing is a God that just says, you have to believe no matter what the information says and whatever you felt in your heart, you have to believe in me or I just punish you anyway, okay? So the problem is when you're claiming objectively good and just, okay? And like it's the full package together. You can claim there's an all-powerful God that demands you believe in it, and as long as you don't care if it's just or not, well then yeah, it can just punish you for no reason. But then the question is, why would you worship that thing? Okay? Now, finally, this also explains why the common escape hatch, God is outside logic, time and space, doesn't actually solve any things. Because if it means God talk is truth apt, then God is good can't function as binding as far as a premise of worship, trust, or condemnation. Okay? So if God is outside of space, time, and logic, then you can't access the proper tools you need to then come down here and write rules and laws and hit people in the name of it, okay? And if it is truth app, then the moment you state it and apply it to human lives, it enters the same finite interface pipeline and becomes subject to the same fairness constraints. Either way, the agent's responsibility can't be assessed without pretending the agent had direct ultimate access to ultimacy. Direct unlimited access to ultimacy. Okay? So if I can't actually the idea is if you actually had access to an objectively all good thing, the only correct opinion and the only way for it not to be bad information or a bad pipeline is that you would believe it. And so if you didn't have access or didn't have the proper ability to believe it, that calls into question whether or not God is just, and that's where you get the fairness clause. And so now I'm going to run through the machinery of it real quick, like what's written up here. And that'll be the end of the video. All of this stuff is online at my website, and I'll link that down in the description. Okay, let's address the most common objections I've been hearing lately. God's outside of space, time, and logic. So this logic stuff is all real cool, but it doesn't apply to God because he's beyond that stuff, okay? Let's address outside logic first. Outside logic means claims about God are not truth apt, okay? That would mean God is good cannot function as binding premise for condemnation because the system has a built-in ineffability shield, meaning it's immune to critique, but also unable to ground judgment, okay? If the system still wants truth apt doctrine, then the doctrine is stated in logic and enters finite minds as tokens. Therefore, outside logic cannot be used as a contradiction eraser while still issuing binding claims. Meaning if you're going to say God's not logical, then you can't come down here to the real world and write laws and say God definitely wants these, because how are you accessing that truth if it's not coming through logic, okay? Next, outside time. If God acts, reveals, or judges in a way relevant to finite epistemic agents, it shows up as present tokens such as text, events, testimony. Therefore, evaluation still runs through access and capacity restraints. Okay? If God's outside of space and time, the only way for him to get you a message is inside space and time, okay? So where he is doesn't matter because you can't access that part. You're only getting the part that's inside space and time, and that would necessarily have to follow logic to carry any binding authority here in the real world, okay? And then the last one, outside space, if I don't fall down here. If God has no spatial consequences, then there is no public evidence or revelation that can bind anyone, okay? If God communicates, communication instantiates in space, meaning ink, sound, and neurons. So again, the interface pipeline governs what the agent actually receives. So, if it's outside logic, then you can't make any binding claims about it, okay? If it's outside time, it still has to show up. What if God's outside time, anything it tells us still has to show up in the present through our epistemic pipeline, okay? And if it's outside space, the same thing, because time is actually just an overlay, an abstract overlay of space. So whatever's really true of time is really kind of true of space in a way. So if God has no spatial consequence, there again, the only way to get to us is right here through the present finite epistemic tokening system. All right? And finally, if system T uses objective goodness of God to ground worship or condemnation, then system T must ensure objective goodness of God is determinately contentful for finite agents, meaning tokenable enough to guide action. Otherwise, the demand becomes you must obey a claim you are not allowed to meaningfully evaluate, which is indistinguishable from raw imposition and calls into question the free will side of things. So that's sort of it, and this kind of gives you an idea, if you haven't read the books, what existential logicism and finite mind, finite God are doing. We're really, I'm trying to address things where they stand. I'm trying to say, like, here's your belief system, here's the things you want it to say, and the things you can translate it any way you want, but everything you say still has entailments. Words have meanings, those meanings have entailments, and that's the stuff I'm trying to chase down. So, sorry for the rough video. You know, I'm not a videographer here yet. And also, I'm kind of losing my voice. And so, I appreciate you bearing with me. If you stayed through all the machinery part, then congratulations, good on you. Check out the website if you want to see it laid out in a really cohesive, I don't know if I'd say easy to read package, but easy to follow package. And also any of the other concepts and stuff like that. And obviously links to the book if you want to pick one up. But aside from that, that's going to do it for me. I appreciate y'all. Be good.